Okay, one more short video. This one is just on the logistics of what everything means. Here's my simple server folder, and I got some so it sounds like a lot of people are confused with like how to get started and things like that. No problem, just keep asking questions and I'll keep trying to help. Um, so one question that came from people was like, walk me through what all these files mean. So, first of all, the bin folder and the object folder, OBJ folder, these have binary data in them when you compile. If, for example, you were to, I don't know, delete these. God, I hope this is the right thing to do, but I think it is. Let's just assume it is. If I were to delete these and then I were to say .NET run in the simple server folder, notice how they would get recreated, right? So if you think in Eclipse with Java, you have a source folder and then a bin folder, but Eclipse tries to hide that bin folder from you. Like it's there, but the package explorer view doesn't show it, but the like navigator view does. Like it's there, but tries to hide it. The source folder contains your .java files, which is the text of your Java code. And when you compile that to class files to the bytecode, that goes in the bin folder. And those class files are mostly binary. You can't easily read them. This is the same thing happening here. Wow, I'm really backlit. Oh, whatever. Who cares? You don't need to look at me. I'm just pointing at stuff and explaining it. That's also what's happening here. This is binary stuff that gets compiled. Now, why isn't this stuff in the Git repository? Well, if you look at git ignore, this is telling it, listen, don't put anything in there under version control with GitHub. And that makes sense because all the stuff in there can be produced by doing .NET run, right? So that's what's going on there. The files folder, we know what's in here. This is static content that your server can serve. So if you want to serve up any static files, this is where you would put them. And then when you run the server, since it's pointed at the files directory, this is what it will serve. So this is where you get index.html and campus map, PDF, and whatever, there's just the two files in there. The other stuff in here, so if you look at book, what is book? Well, book is a class that represents a book. Now, how do we know that these are all the instance variables we want? Well, if we go in the JSON folder, there's this books.json. Now, if we open this, this is JSON. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation, JSON. And what this is doing is JSON is like square brackets means a list, curly brackets is a dictionary or map, which is key value pairs, and then these are key value pairs. And the only data you can have are essentially strings, doubles, and integers. So this is a string, is the key, maps to 1. The keys have to be strings. The values can be integers or strings, right? So if we look at these keys here for this record, they're the same as the keys here for this record, and so on. And so, what am I looking for? Right, book. If we look at book, this matches up, right? Here's book. All of these things match up with books, right? That's what's going on here. So that is a C# class where all of the fields kind of correspond to this. Now, if we look here in program, this is kind of like the main method. There's two methods in here, test JSON and test server. Test JSON's commented out, test server is the one that's getting invoked. This code doesn't have an explicit main method, but it's a .NET utility thing that it can like take it and create a class and stick these methods in it and stick this code and put it inside main. So it knows enough to do that. So main is calling this function, which is calling this, which is just the line that like creates the server and then keeps reading commands. Nothing exciting there. This is, I just had this in there as a test. I just left it in there. This is saying like, okay, create options which are like case insensitives. Like, don't worry about case. Read the text of JSON books.json. In other words, this whole thing, read this whole entire gigantic file into a huge string and put that here. Now, take this JSON serializer, deserialize method, and call that, and this is a generic method with a list of book as the generic parameter. Take that text in these options and deserialize. What that means is deserialize. Serialize is like take data and write it to, like, take data inside the memory of the computer and write it out into some durable format. So like write data as text or write data as binary or something like that. Like write data that's stored inside your program, write it out into something that you can stick in a file. So deserialize is the opposite of that. Take data that's in a file of some kind and turn it back into instances of a class. So that's what we're doing here. This is like instances of a class pushed out into text. But we want to undo that process. Well, that's what this does. It's like, oh, read all this stuff as a big string, and then take that string, deserialize it into a list of books. And how do we know how to match up all those key value pairs? Well, that's why we made the book class. That's why we made all these instance variables match all of these key names. That's why they all match. And the case insensitive part is because these are lowercased, but the convention in C# is to uppercase it. So I made these uppercase, these were already lowercase. And so I was like, well, I could go in and try to uppercase all of this, or I could make this look like weird C#, but I decided instead, you know what, I'll just say case name insensitive, case insensitive. So we don't care about capitalization. So this is going, this var here, what type is this? It's actually going to be a list of books. How do we know it's a list of books? Because it said deserialize this using these options into this type, which is a list of books. Then we're just grabbing the book at position 4 and like just checking that the title and the authors match with just some right lines, right? So this was just some testing. I was like, let me make sure I can correctly deserialize data. So I tested that ahead of time to make sure it worked, but I left the code in there just so that you could see it. And if you want to mess around with deserialization, no problem. Just comment this out and uncomment that. And now let me stop this. Stop. Now, if we run this .NET run, it'll run, but it'll just deserialize. And really, did I not save it? Oh, I don't know if you know this, but it turns out you have to actually save things. Yeah, there we go. Flex 4 in action by Tariq Ahmed. Yeah, so right, that's what this is now doing. Now I'm going to put this back how it was. There we go. So that's what the JSON files mean. Now, Buffy, this is actually all the episodes of Buffy the Vampire Slayer that I got from TV Maze, this website. And show is show is to Buffy as book is to books. This is like, I called it show. I really should have called it episode because it's matching a particular episode. Name of the episode, what season, what episode number, air date, air time, how long was it, the whatever, I don't know, whatever date is in there, that's what this can get. I didn't know if we were going to use that. Turns out we're not really using that. But I left it in there just because pretty sure I had tested it and it worked. So that's what this is and what this is. You can ignore those, we're not using them. Fine. What else do we have? So program, we know this is like the main method. Book, what we know is that is a sort of deserialized version of the serialized data that's in books. The README is pretty useless. This is just like, this .md means markdown. This is another type of markup language, but because CS people apparently love puns, they called it markdown. Woo-hoo-hoo. This is like a bunch of ideas for features we might implement. And then I never took this out. These aren't the exact features we're implementing. I should delete this or update it. Simple server CS project. If you look at this, this is XML. You can see there's an open project tag, a closed project tag, an open property group tag, a closed property group tag. So it's like HTML, but you can make whatever tags you want. And this is what tells it it's .NET.7. I need you to make an executable file and enable nullable and I don't know, whatever else. This is just configuration for .NET. So we don't really have to pay much attention to this. And then there's simple server. And this is the simple server code that does all of the simple server things. We have a bunch of stuff in here. We have this iServlet. This is the interface telling us like, hey, a servlet is something that can process a request where the request is HTTP listener context. So stuff we got from the user trying to connect to us. Book handler is the thing we have for handling books. Right now, all this does is like deserialize the books, pick book number 4. We actually have that code in program, in program.cs. But then this also takes it one step further and turns it into HTML and then writes it back to the response that's part of the context, where context again is the listener context and the connection. So all that's fine. Foo handler, this just doesn't do a whole lot. It just like creates a web page and ships it out. Oh, and then here we are with the simple HTTP server. So yeah, I don't know. So if we now do .NET run, and this runs, the idea is you'll be able to type commands and tell the server to do things. Right now, the only command we can do, well, if we type anything else like ASDF, it doesn't really do anything. We can type stop. Now it actually stops. How does that work? Well, if you look at program test server, what does this do? Well, this creates a server, serve data out of the files folder, use port 8080 while true. So an infinite loop. Whew. What are we going to do? Well, we're going to print, server started. You can try the following commands. The only command we have is stop for stop the server. We read from the console. So you type something in, hit enter, we read it into this variable, and we check, hey, if it's stop, tell the server to stop and break this loop. That's the only way to end this while true loop right now. And what we can do is we can put else ifs in here for other types of commands, and then go from there. Yeah, so this is like main, this is outside of the simple server, and then inside the simple server, this is everything else. Let me, oh my goodness gracious, let me, yeah, here's the server. How does this work? Well, there's this listen method. What does listen do? Well, this part here creates a listener and listens on whatever port number we have, which is, in our case, is 8080. So, and this must mean localhost. I didn't really look up why that means localhost, but it does. So we're listening in port 8080. We start the listener, so it's listening while not done. So while nobody called the stop method to set this done to true to break this loop, right, that we're waiting for connection, get context, which is receive a connection and grab the context, then pass it off to this process method. Now, this is just listening. So this method will block. Like this method, you'll call this method, and then it'll just sit there and wait. And if nobody ever goes to localhost colon 8080, this will just sit there forever. Once somebody goes there, this will return the listener context, which like has the response object to connect to the response, and has information about what the IP address that connected to it was and all this other stuff. Process is what does the actual work of processing the request. So if we go to this, oh my goodness, it must be 4:27, and it is. I'm exhausted. I gotta go get the kids in a second here. Okay, what does this do? Well, this gets the path, which would be like /foo/whatever or /books. We're substringing it 1, so we're like throwing out that initial slash and just getting the rest of it. We're printing this. That's just debugging. You can really get rid of this. We're checking if that path, like foo or books, matches a servlet. If it does, we're telling the servlet, call your process request method on this listener context. So this will do whatever needs to process request. Then we'll return. Return just means like, okay, we're done processing this. Go listen for another connection. If that doesn't happen, then we fall down here. We're like, okay, is the file name null or empty? If it is, look for a default. Otherwise, oh, goodness gracious. Otherwise, we end up down here where we're like building up a path and checking if the file exists and setting the MIME type out and actually serving the file. So all the actual work of processing a request is really in this process method. And this process method is called by the listen method, which is kind of the main loop of the server. And so that's kind of what all these pieces are doing. Binary data, bin and object, don't need to worry about that too much. Files is static content you want to serve. JSON are just the JSON files. The only one we're using is books. This is a textification of data from a bunch of books. This book class matches it. Program has our two different versions of main. This one, which is just like testing that the JSON reading works. This one is like running the server. This is probably where a lot of your code will go. The README we can ignore because it hasn't been updated. Show is to Buffy as book is to books. We don't have to use that though. All the simple server code is here, and this is just .NET configuration stuff. So that's everything that's in there. Okay, let's see if I can process out this video and get it posted before I need to leave to get the kids.